This week on Oasis by the Sea, Pastor Keith teaches Prince of Peace from Isaiah 61.
I'm going to ask my daughter to come up and read Isaiah 61, 1 through 9. Isaiah 61, 1 through 9 for us.
All right, Isaiah 61, 1 through 9. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring the good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Then they will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations, and they will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. And strangers will stand and pasture your flocks, and foreigners will be your farmers and your vine dressers. But you will be called the priests of the Lord. You will be spoken of as ministers of our God. You will eat the wealth of the nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your shame, you will have a double portion, and instead of humiliation, they will shout for joy over their portion. Therefore, they will possess a double portion in their land. Everlasting joy will be theirs. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and the burnt offering, and I will faithfully give them their recompense. And I will make an everlasting covenant with them. Then their offspring will be known among the nations, and their descendants in the midst of the peoples. All who see them will recognize them, because they are the offspring whom the Lord has blessed.
If you couldn't figure out, we're going to be in Isaiah 61 today. So that's where we're at. We've been going through Isaiah, and the first run through, we're going to go back and hit a few more things, but what I decided to do first is hit all the spots that talked about Jesus first. And so we've been doing that, and we skipped now from, a few things, and now we're up to 61. And this is going to be our last one that has to do about Jesus from Isaiah. We're finishing that part up. On another note, last Friday, you may or may not have known, was an International Day of the Persecuted Christian. Don't know if you knew that. I'm not the sort of person who preaches a sermon just because there's some special day on the calendar. That's not my normal thing. But it's certainly an opportunity to be reminded. I'm going to give you an example. My example is an American couple, Davy and Natalie Lloyd. They were missionaries in Haiti. If I understood their role correctly when I read it, they helped with a project called House of Compassion, housing 36 children. And this was their heinous crime for which they died last month in Haiti. Davy knew the risks. He had grown up as a missionary kid in Haiti. He had been kidnapped as a teenager with other teenagers. And by the grace of God, had been returned home. It's not like he didn't understand that it was going to be dangerous in Haiti. I have a hard time believing that when he met his wife in school, that they didn't talk about that before they went back to Haiti. I think his wife probably knew before they went, hey, we're going to a place together as a couple to do this work. By the way, it's so dangerous. I've been kidnapped before and didn't know if I was going to get out alive. This is what we're going to go do. I don't know them personally, but this I know, that they knew God and they obeyed God and they served despite the warning signs, and now they're dead. That's what I know. One of my friends from Prague, I used to live in Prague. I used to go to an international church in Prague. There were some pretty interesting people there. One of those people was Tom Johnson, if you ever want to look him up. He was a part of a world council for persecuted Christianity at the highest levels. And when I say highest levels, regardless of what you think of the Catholic Church, he met with the Pope regularly to talk about these kinds of issues. This wasn't some slouch. This is a guy that did conversations and talked with countries and worked out strategies for protecting Christians. On average, 13 people die every day because they claim to be a Christian. Yesterday, 13 people, roughly, quit living because they were killed because they dared to say, I'm a Christian, and identify with that word. And I'm not telling you that they would all agree with you. Some of them were Catholics, and maybe you don't think Catholics are going to heaven. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about whether we agree with their doctrine. I'm saying that for their boldness of willing to just stand and say, I'm a Christian, they died. 13 people. And it'll happen again today. If you saw the title, it said Prince of Peace with a question mark. Every Christmas we sing these songs and read these passages that promise that Jesus would bring peace on earth, goodwill to men, that he will in fact be the Prince of Peace. So where is that? Where is that? Where is the Messiah who would end wars, who would restore order, who would eliminate bloodshed and pain and loss? How can we claim that Jesus is the Prince of Peace when the body count of his followers rises every single day? I ask these kinds of questions because I think real people ask these kinds of questions. And if we don't ask them and if we don't find an answer, then our faith is not really handling the hard stuff. This is the hard stuff. These are real struggles. They're not small questions. The Bible is either true or it is not. And these tensions, these conflicts, attempting to reconcile what we read with the world that we live in have caused many to stumble. And by stumble, I mean at best people who entertain doubts because their life is difficult when they imagined that all their problems would go away when they became a Christian. It never happened. And now they're still in the church, but they're wrestling. Why? I thought it was all supposed to come good. Why is it still hard? And at worst, I mean people who have left the church and renounced their faith and they're not coming back. Eden read today's passage from Isaiah 61. And did it sound controversial and hard and confronting? Not particularly. It seemed promising, right? It sounded good. It sounded nice. It sounded like rescuing people. That sounds good. And yet I'm going to tell you that passage isn't used by Jesus just once. We're going to find out that he's the one who wrote that, and he's going to say it again. And the results of him saying it again aren't going to be peaceful. It's going to be hard. It's going to lead us into the heart of this conflict. And I'm going to give you a preview. Here's why it's hard. Some of the prophecy of Isaiah 61 has been fulfilled, and some of it has not. And that is true of many of the things that we read in the Bible. Some of it has been fulfilled, and some of it has not. And figuring out which is which and living in that properly, that can be difficult. And the fulfillment of that, the demonstration of that, boldly illustrates the conflict between expectation and reality. But before we go any further, let's orient ourselves with the passage. Like I said, we've been looking at the passages that Isaiah clearly and specifically writes about Jesus. We've reached our last one. Isaiah 61 is not only about Jesus, it is written by Jesus specifically. Jesus speaks for himself, and here's some passages. In Isaiah 49, 50, and 61, sometimes in Isaiah it reads like God's talking about the Messiah, so that's that. And sometimes it's Isaiah writing about what he's seen about the Messiah. But every so often, not very often, the Messiah speaks in first person. He says, I, me, that stuff. That means Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, he's the one giving the information to Isaiah. Isaiah is writing Jesus' words. That's what that means. And so we have a few spots in Isaiah where Jesus is actually speaking for himself. In Isaiah 49, Jesus has a section where he talks to the nations that aren't Jewish, called Gentiles, and there's some promises there. And then he flips to Israel, and he says, I, Jesus, am making some promises to you, Israel, and then that's that. And then in Isaiah 50, it's to everybody, and so he makes some proclamations about Jesus to all people, all the world. That's in 50, and now we're in 61. And we're trying to figure this out. For the final time in Isaiah, Jesus is going to speak for himself. But not only that, as I mentioned before, Jesus later is going to quote himself and interpret his own words. So here's the thing, right? Jesus wrote something or said something and he wanted it written down, and then Jesus uses what he said. I'm pretty certain that however Jesus used it was the right way to use it. This doesn't make sense to me, right? If Jesus interpreted and used his own words, he knew why he said it in the first place, and he knows why he's using it now. So we'd probably better really look at how Jesus uses his own words if we want to understand what he meant and wanted to done with it, because that would follow. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at not just what Jesus said in Isaiah, but then how Jesus used himself, what he said. And we're going to figure that out. So let's start with Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 2a. Now, I'm going to stop at a really weird spot, and there's a reason for that. It isn't a choice I made, it's a choice Jesus made. I'm going to stop exactly where Jesus stops later. So Jesus is going to be reading this, and he's going to stop in a really strange spot. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stop where he stops. So here we are, Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 2a. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and freedom to the prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. And then I'm going to stop there. This sounds pretty positive. These are nice words. Once again, by the way, Jesus is identifying himself as a rescuer for those held captive. This is the third time in Isaiah that Jesus, speaking for himself, has said, I am a rescuer. You are in bondage, and I'm going to fix it. You're captured. You can't get out. You're in chains. You're stuck. And what I'm going to do, what my purpose is to unstick the stuck. It's to rescue the people in chains. It's to get you out. That's what I'm about. This is what I'm going to do. And he says it again right here. Let's just talk a little bit about rescue as an idea. Rescue always requires force, and force always implies conflict. This is important. See, we can talk about Jesus rescuing us, and that sounds really nice. But if we don't understand that that means that there's a conflict, then we're missing an important part of what's going on in the world and in our life. See, if all Jesus had to do is say, come here, and I could, then no force would be required. Rescue means something more powerful than me is holding me, and it won't let go. And it will not let go unless something more powerful makes it let go. If that's not the conditions, then it's not rescue. It's not rescue unless what's holding me is stronger than me and will not let go unless it's made to let go. If you're in prison and I want to bust you out, there's going to be some risk. There's going to be some violence, some destruction of property, something. But not all force is physical. There's political force, there's emotional force, there's spiritual force, there's financial force. There's several ways in which force can be applied to set a prisoner free. Not all of it is physical, but some kind of force must be applied to set a prisoner free. If force was not required, the prisoner would be a guest, free to leave whenever they wished. So every time Jesus promises to rescue, he is also promising conflict. I want us to understand this. Jesus came to do conflict for us. He came to wage war for us. He came to apply force on our behalf. What held us was not going to let go, and Jesus forcibly dealt with it. So what we just read is great, so long as we're the prisoners getting rescued. So long as we are the afflicted and the brokenhearted. This is good news. The Jewish people read these promises of Jesus for centuries. scouring them in search of hope, and they knew them and still know them better than most Christians do. When Jesus went to his hometown to speak to the people who had watched him grow up, the people in Nazareth, this is the passage he chooses to read. Now, some gospel writers summarize this visit with a short explanation. For instance, Matthew in 13:54, he simply says this: Jesus taught them in the synagogue, and then they rejected him. And then there's an account of how his hometown rejected him, and that's about it. He simplifies it a lot. But Luke gives far more detail. And so that's why we're going to go, because it's Luke that describes what's going on here. So we're going to go to Luke chapter 4, 16 through 20. Luke chapter 4, 16 through 20. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. And the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and he opened the book and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are downtrodden, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord." And he closed the book. And he gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed upon him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And all were speaking well of him and wondering at the gracious words which were falling from his lips. I'm going to stop there for a second. For now we can hold on to the idea that Jesus isn't in hot water yet with his audience. This is how it finishes, and they were saying, "Is this not Joseph's son?" Jesus is saying, this has been fulfilled in your hearing, and they're not mad. They're not mad yet. He said, this promise of setting free, doing great things, all this stuff, there's some surprise that goes with, isn't this Joseph's son? There's like, really? Joseph's son? But it's not anger. It's just like, are you, really? Joseph's kid's doing this? Okay. But there's no anger yet. They're not mad that he's proclaiming himself to have this power. That isn't true. This seems like a great place to stop. Right here. You know, one of the greatest fears a pastor can have is offending people. Really. You offend people and they leave. In a large congregation, it's kind of a sign of success, or certainly a sign of maybe more tithes. Like if there's more room, people in the room, maybe, the lights will stay on. The greater capacity for influence, maybe a badge of competence or capability. Offended people are difficult. They create headaches. In all honesty, offended people tie my insides in knots. It's not a good day when there's offended people in the room. And Jesus has spoken all of this truth, and no one's offended yet. All he has to do is stop. Right here. That's all he's got to do. And everyone will be happy. Jesus has read the passage, delivered the message that he has fulfilled this prophecy. He has essentially called himself the Messiah, and everything is still okay. And the crowd is surprised, amazed, but not offended. Surely this is the best outcome Jesus could have asked for, right? I mean, he's the Messiah, and he wants people to know he's the Messiah. Why doesn't he just quit? Except he doesn't. Quit. Let's read verses 23 through 30. Jesus is picking a fight. He said to them, "No doubt you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' Whatever we heard that was done in Capernaum, do that here in your hometown as well." And he said, "Truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. But I say to you in truth that there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut for 3 years and 6 months, and when a great famine came over all the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things, and they rose up and cast him out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But he passed through their midst, and he went his way. Why? What does all this mean? This is nothing that a regular pastor would do, like just when everybody was listening and they were happy and they were like, oh, those were very lovely words, he wouldn't slam them in the next sentence. Why? I think we can answer both these questions together. Jesus read the passage and he set himself up to be the fulfillment. Everything seemed fine. The problem is that Jesus knows what's going to happen next, and he has no time for it. These people don't want to follow him. They want a show. It's going to be, oh, yay, you're the Messiah. Do tricks. We want a magic show. Amaze, astound, amuse us. Look, Joseph's son learned magic tricks. Everybody come see. Not only does Jesus rebuke them for their attitude, he steps right past that. If you don't know who Zarephath and Naaman were, they were non-Jewish people that God's prophets, Elijah and Elisha, showed the power of God to. And Jesus' point is this, there are a whole lot of Jewish people like you that God ignored to go meet people with faith that weren't even Jewish, Gentile people. And I'm in the same situation right now. You're all here, but there's no faith. It's going to go to the Gentiles. And they're mad because they figured that out. See, we don't get it because we don't know that, but they knew their Old Testament and they knew exactly what he was saying. Jesus was saying, this isn't for you. You don't want to follow me. Jesus said to his hometown, I'm here to rescue the captives, and you are not them. And that's hard. See, they were going to figure this all out eventually anyway. No matter what Jesus did, no matter what miracles he performed, no matter how much they clapped and they cheered, when the moment came to respond to the call, which was come and follow me, no one was going to leave home. No one was going to come. They were just going to say, yay, Jesus, that was really good. Go on and do your thing. Save us from the Romans. We'll be cheering from back here. Nobody was ready to follow. They were ready to cheer. But Jesus didn't need fans. He wants followers. And by followers, I don't mean like on Instagram, okay? I mean people who actually are going to stand up and move and go where he goes and take up the risks as their risks and take up his goals as their goals and take up their crosses even as he takes up his cross, who accept the costs that he accepted. I tell you the truth, the world has many Jesus fans, but the followers are few. It is easy to stand in a stadium and cheer for Jesus and love the stuff that he does and see miracles and think that that's amazing. It is easy to stand and cheer for Jesus. It is not easy to follow him. And he doesn't need fans. He's never cared. His ego doesn't require that. He doesn't need you to be a fan. He wants you to be a follower. And me too. Jesus quotes himself. He quotes a passage that for centuries had filled his people with hope, and yet when he says it the second time, it becomes a message of rejection, not because the offer was insincere, but because the audience didn't actually want to be rescued. And that's the catch. The world doesn't actually want to be saved. The world as a whole, as a rule, doesn't want to be rescued from what Jesus actually came to rescue us from. Their problem back then is they wanted to be rescued from Rome. That's what they wanted Jesus to do. Jesus, come rescue us from Rome. Except Jesus didn't come to rescue them from Rome. He came to rescue them from sin. And the penalty of sin and selfishness and the brokenness of their relationship with God. And today we want him to rescue us from poverty or illness or a bad day or loneliness. And we want him to save us. We have a list of stuff we'd like Jesus to save us from. And he's still saying, no, I want to save you from sin. I want to save you from brokenness. I want to save you from what's destroying your relationship with God. Some of this other stuff will come with it, but that's not the point. The real point, the center of it is, I want to rescue you from yourself. And we don't want to be rescued from ourselves. We like ourselves. See, what would be the point of breaking someone out of jail if the first thing they did as soon as they were rescued was flip you off, run back to their cell, slam the door shut, and lock the door? Why rescue that person? And as much as we want to blame our mess on the devil or our family or mean people or circumstances, the true jail keeper that's keeping us from the most important freedom isn't anybody else but me and you. We imprison ourselves. And for so many, our most committed loyalty, even to violence, is that commitment to our own free will. That is the value that we would die for or kill for. And that's why people hate Jesus. Later in the book of Luke, we read this that Jesus says, Do you suppose that I came to grant peace on earth? I tell you no, but rather division. And he goes on to say, from now on, 5 members of one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. Verse 53, they will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He just says all of it. Division. I know more than one person who I've seen make a statement of faith, pray a prayer, come to church, say they really, really, really love church, went back to their friends, told their friends, and their friends mocked them, and their friends attacked them, and essentially threatened them without using so many words that if you keep doing this Jesus stuff, we're done. 2 of those people I've never seen in this church again. I know another person who's in the same situation, and what they're doing is working through it in tears, and yet they still come. But the price hasn't changed. That person is having to watch their friends ridicule them and walk away and say they won't stand with them anymore, and they don't want anything to do with them anymore, and they're not being kind about it. Despite the gentleness and beauty of Christ, those who reject him hate him. People who aren't Buddhists don't usually hate Buddhists. People who aren't Hindu don't generally hate Hindus. Yet despite the fact that Jesus offers healing and rescue and joy and eternal life, those qualities somehow elicit hatred from those who have no interest in what is offered. And Jesus knew this. He knew what it meant more than anyone. He knew he'd be killed at the insistence of the very people that he had chosen to be his own. How ironic that God chose the Jewish people from Abraham onward on purpose, blessed them, worked with them, gave them the scriptures, and yet God knew all along that those very people he loved so much would kill his son. If this is true, then how could the angels proclaim peace on earth, goodwill to men at Jesus' birth? How can that be true? And here's why. It's because so far Jesus has only done half of what he was born to do. I'm going to read you the next part of the prophecy. We already put it up here. This is the part that was cut short. It's the other shoe, so to speak. It continues like this, in the day of vengeance of our God. And then it talks about this really nice stuff, comforting all who mourn, granting those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting, so they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. Going back to that last slide that I put in yellow, day of vengeance. Jesus did not come the first time for vengeance at all. He didn't come to visit the wrath of God. He did not come to get vengeance on anybody. He made it very, very clear when in John chapter 3, it was 16 and 17 and all that. He says, I didn't come here to condemn the world. I came to save it. I'm not here this time. There's no violence. There's no force in that sense. I'm not bringing it to the world. That's not this trip. And so as soon as we get to vengeance, that's not the first time anymore. He is coming in vengeance. It hasn't happened yet. It'll be rough. The reason Jesus stopped reading at that exact spot is because the next words had not been fulfilled in their presence that day. That day was not the day of vengeance. That day is still coming, and it's not here yet. Jesus was born to do it. Do not suppose that Jesus has already done all that he was born to do. He is not. And here's the irony. He came in peace, and the world is violent still. He will come in force, and the world will finally have peace. That's the reality. We aren't going to have peace until Jesus comes in force, because the jailers can only be defeated with force, and the jailers are still out there. But here's the good news. Like Zarephath the widow and Naaman the Syrian, the world is full of people from every nation and language and color and social status who are ready to follow him. So here's some takeaways from today that we might carry as Jesus quotes himself to his hometown and says some really hard things. Are we followers, fans, or enemies? I doubt, but it could be true that there's someone in here that would say that inside they know that they're an enemy, that they hate all this stuff, but somehow they're here anyway. That could be true. There could be some fans. Love what you do, Jesus. Love your show. Love your gifts. Love your music. Love your beauty. Love your forgiveness. Don't really want to follow you, though. That seems kind of difficult and dangerous and hard. I'm not really interested in the following bit, but I'm sure willing to be a fan. Glad you're doing your thing. Number 2, when we witness, are we inviting followers, not selling fandom? I am tired of us dumbing down Christianity to make it as easy as possible for someone to say the few right words, and then we can check them off of some box or put them on a hashtag list of we won one more to Christ. And where there's no evidence that they're a follower, we just managed to get them to say some stuff, and now we chuck them off as a victory. That's not followership. Our witness simply needs to be, are you willing to follow Jesus? And if the answer is no, this is a strange thing. Read about the life of Jesus, I dare you. Try to find one place where someone rejected him and Jesus chased them down for another go. Not once. He said, okay, bye, next. You're busy? You want to bury your dad first? Fine, bury your dad first. I'll see it. Oh, you want to know what you have to do to enter the kingdom of heaven? Sure, I'll give you a standard so big you couldn't possibly do it. I don't want your standards. I want you to follow me. We need to get back to the heart of following Jesus. And if we're going to invite somebody into that, then we invite them to follow. And if they say no, they say no. They're not rejecting us, they're rejecting Christ. Here's the last one. We are living in the area of division, not yet the kingdom of peace. And if we don't get that, if we don't understand that, then we're faced with the constant disappointment of, but I thought being a Christian was all the fun stuff. It's roses and sunshine and, no, the golden streets are later. Not now. We are constantly going to be disappointed with Christ and his call if we think that it's going to lead to peace with everyone else. If we think that that's the way it's going to be right now, it's just going to hurt. And we have to anticipate and understand division and rejection and hatred of Christ comes with the calling. It comes with the following. It's part of the package. You've got to own that. That's just the way it is. Or we become upset. Satan is described as the ruler of this world in John 12:31. Becoming a follower of Jesus has amazing cosmic benefits. A new Christian I'm mentoring said, I get it now. People who don't know Jesus are missing out. That is absolutely true. She finally got it when poof, oh, I get it. I'm telling people about Jesus because they're missing out. That is absolutely true. But it's also true that it's the minute we become a Christian, we've made an enemy of an extremely powerful being. Not someone to fear, but certainly nobody to ignore. The violence against Christians in this world is ample proof of the hate that he has for us. Up to and killing workers at an orphanage just because they follow Jesus. World peace is coming, but it hasn't arrived yet. Until that day comes, following Jesus means the same thing for all of us. It means the greatest resistance our society will allow. Whether it's words and accusations and friends being furious at us here in Australia, or bullets in Haiti because that's what you can get away with there. Whatever the level is that a society will allow, that is the resistance we will encounter as Christians. We, the rescued, live in a world of jailers, furious that we have been freed. It is a conflict we often try desperately to ignore, to pretend that it's not true, maybe to avoid at all costs. But Jesus, the one we're following, never backed away from looking it straight in the eye. And neither should we. Let's pray.
You've been listening to Oasis by the Sea. Thank you for joining us. May God richly bless you as you walk in obedience to Him this week. See you next week at the Oasis.